friends. Welcome.
Hi, church.
Yes, welcome to another exciting episode of Calvary Connection. Today, we are going to be talking about chapter 2 in our Becoming a Hybrid Church book. This is dealing with worship in the hybrid church. And I think this is what the big piece that we really think about when we talk about hybrid church, right? All the other programming, yes, that's part of it, but worship is kind of the flagship. That's the flagship of church.
For sure.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we've kind of been feeling our way through this hybrid thing with worship for, about a year and a half now, right?
Right, at least a year and a half, yeah. Because before that, we were trying to figure out how to use technology and screens, and so it's been a long journey for here at Calvary anyway, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, worship being the central piece of gathering as Christians, having a place to come and gather. Again, it's probably where we put a lot of our energy, our time, thinking through that, knowing that when you have worship that draws us closer in our relationship with God, then everything else kind of falls off of that or follows off of that. So even in my run for the bishop, I just kept saying, if we can have churches identify worship plus one thing they want to hang their hat on. But worship is that primary, central, gathering, filling place where we do sacramental ministry that really I think unites us as a community, as well as draws us closer to God. So it really is the heart and soul of what we do.
It's a real unifying thing for congregations everywhere, right? And we've been trying to do it with this online piece in a way that brings new challenges that we never had to deal with before. So many of the things that we've dealt with over the last year were not even on our radar prior to this.
That's right.
Yeah, we've had hiccups with all of the things with figuring out how to broadcast it all to start with.
Right.
Right? And then there was the camera situation. And then, you've had meetings with your senior pastor group, right? About the privacy things?
Right. We caught right away that having children in clear view when there's separated families and custody issues, all the way to knowing who's communing and going through the line, or seeing that a whole family's in worship and that's our neighbors, and knowing that they're not home, what does that produce? And so it's like worst case scenario kind of things. But again, if we're not thinking proactively about them, we would hate to have our worshiping community be affected by some of what we're trying to do. So there's technical things, copyright, we had to increase all of our licensing issues, all those technical issues that we talked about in the first chapter.
That's right, that difference between adaptive and technical, the how we do it versus the what are we doing and why.
Yes.
This is the nuts and bolts, this is the technical stuff.
And so we had a lot of technical stuff, and we're not still out of the woods there, but really trying to think about, we're getting worship to anybody who wants it, to say, we need to be thinking thoughtfully about that. All technical issues, and the adaptive issue really here is, why are we doing this? Who are we trying to reach? What is God calling us to here? And really being thoughtful about that. Is it reaching all the world for Jesus Christ, or is it reaching our members that can't otherwise be here? And so I think really thinking through the why and the who, those kind of bigger adaptive challenges is key.
And especially because those two different groups, the wider world versus our members who just might not be able to be present, they're going to be looking for different things in worship.
For sure.
Right?
For sure. I know our members love to see who's in worship.
Yeah.
They're like, we love to connect. And there might be other people that are not connected to the community.
So they wouldn't know anybody anyway.
They want a good sermon from Vicar Jamie, or they're looking for some inspiration or some prayer. And again, I think trying to think through those three things and be thoughtful about them is really going to be some of the challenge ahead too.
Yeah. Well, and especially because a lot of that processing of who we're trying to program for also leads us into the conversation about what makes online worship worthwhile, what makes it engaging, because it is different than just watching a movie online, right? It's this experiential and participatory event. That's what worship always has been.
Yeah.
It involves your person joining together with a community of people.
Right.
And how do we make that an engaging experience? That's a complicated question.
It's true. And someone called us out on this by saying the only thing interactive that we have done is give online. And it isn't really about the offering. I mean, there's a lot of things about the offering that are important with your own personal faith, as well as what it means to be a part of a community. But again, so we've talked about, well, how do we do the prayers?
Yeah.
How can we invite someone in to say, share a prayer request on the live stream? Not that it would get to the preacher up front or the pastor up front, but maybe that person can engage even where they are with the staff person. But we need to have that staff then,
Right.
and we need somebody mature enough to respond in prayer, almost some of our prayer chain warriors to do that. What about engaging in the sermon? We don't really do that live, even in the sanctuary, but how do we get some feedback? Is that later in the week with everybody? What if I don't sing? Do you just kind of fast forward or like chill out during the songs or watch everyone else sing? I mean, all of these things are just really what we're trying to get some input on. How do you experience the worship service that we're putting up? And how would your neighbor experience that? So inviting somebody not connected to our church, to get that input would really help us understand the adaptive challenges, solutions to those challenges.
For sure. Well, and that was something that actually came up in the Zoom conversation that we had around the first podcast in this series. We had a bunch of people that joined us for that conversation, and I asked, what are some of the challenges with engagement in the virtual sphere? And one of the things that was brought up was something like Sunday school. How do we effectively engage kids in a hybrid or online service? I mean, it's not just putting up a video, which we've done a lot of, right? It's especially in a time when kids who have gone to school have spent all week, at least last year, doing online school, coming to watch another thing at church. That doesn't really engage, right? And I think that's a big challenge, is figuring out how we do adaptive Sunday school online. I think that a lot of people are facing that challenge. Or the big one, I mean, the one that we've really been wrestling with theologically, sacraments, right? Things like baptism and communion. In the basic stuff of those things is this idea of physical presence, right? We talk about Jesus using ordinary physical elements, and being present has always been a huge part of that. It's been a critical piece of sacrament, of communion, of baptism. It really had me asking the question of, what does it mean to be present?
Yes.
Right? I mean, if we gather around the communion table, obviously we're present then, right? We're standing around the altar. But what if, when the pastor says the words of institution, we're sitting in the back of the room? Are we present? Or what if we're in a different room, like we're using the screen in the fellowship hall? Is that present? Well, I think we can make an argument. Yes, we're doing that in a present way. Or what we've been trying to do this year, where we speak the words aloud to people sitting at home, and they can participate. Is that being present? At least for me, I think where this has kind of led me is to wonder if presence has less to do with being in the same physical space and more of an intentional bringing yourself into that moment, wherever you might happen to be, that you're doing the same thing intentionally at the same time. Maybe that's what presence is. But I think it is part of a bigger conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, when I used to teach communion, I remember thinking that there are really three elements. It's the physical element, it's the command by God, and it's your believing heart. Honestly, you have to come with a believing heart. So we've traditionally done that together. And I might be motivated by your believing heart when my heart is kind of wandering off. But being in a community that way, calling us together, we've found ways to do that. But you're right. How can we? And the ELC initially with COVID was saying to us, don't do virtual communion because there are the people who are by themselves. And so how does that translate?
Right. How do you be community by yourself?
So you're blessing yourself with the sacrament of communion, which we just wouldn't think about doing.
Right.
And again, it takes away the element of presence. But we've learned too to say, can we risk that? Can we risk that God is big enough to understand that?
Is the Sabbath created for humankind rather than humankind for the Sabbath?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so you've even seen us adapt our practices for that. So if you're watching the recorded worship on Wednesday for Sunday, and communion's a part of it, that even if you're alone in a nursing home and have the elements, that with believing hearts, we believe that God is present.
God shows up.
And going to fill you with the goodness of the sacrament. But these are just major shifts.
And they're new, too. I mean, this question of presence is something that Martin Luther never had to think about, because you just were present. I mean, there's no way to do it otherwise. Right? And so now we're in this space that we haven't had to ask these questions in this way before.
Right. Yeah. And there's no real roadmap out. That's why we're creating one. That's why we're having you read this book along with us and have your input and your experience and your insight, so that we can truly lean into this time being the best church that we can be. Yeah.
Well, let's dive into some specific parts of the chapter we were looking at here. So one thing that jumped out at me right away, first page of the chapter, page 19, where they talk about, they bring back that memory of the worship wars, right? The traditional music versus the contemporary music. You had this kind of like almost a single axis of these people that were kind of fighting, and this was churches everywhere, right? They had
every denomination.
Absolutely. Like, do we do traditional music? Do we do contemporary music? Do we try to do blended? And that there is absolutely the potential for that same kind of a struggle with the idea of physical space versus virtual space, right? It almost adds another dimension to that debate, because then you can have like, well, do we do in-person contemporary versus in-person traditional, or online contemporary and online traditional? And I think that's part of the challenge too, is being able to make sure we're not offering just one mode of worship in one space. Right? Gosh, that's hard to do.
Absolutely. And again, I think I can see where this is another war of sorts, about where do you land on this and how do you view this. And again, your opinions matter, so let us know about how you think about that. But I do think that here we are into the new reality of trying to think through what really counts.
Yeah. And I think for me that really rings true, because my approach to the whole worship wars thing was always like, God will meet you through whatever medium is most meaningful to you. That's the entire point. God just wants to be present with you. Right. And I think that holds true here too. Like, if physical presence is where you most feel the presence of God, God will show up there. If online worship is where you most find the most powerful presence of God, God will show up there. God is not bound by our own, three-dimensional space. And I think that's one of the things that's important for us to keep forefront in our mind in all of this.
I agree. Yeah. And what caught my attention was going on there to page 20, just trying to understand that, as you said, online worship we've discovered is real worship. Yeah. And again, I think it is maybe a preference or not a preference when it comes down to it. But it goes on to say, gathering online allowed for some sense of community, a way to participate in something that was meaningful and communal, a place for scripture to be read and for preaching and teaching to happen, and a place where people could pray with and for others. Discovering that we have heard this too, there are people who prefer to worship with us online.
Even when they are free and clear to come in person, for any amount of reasons, that's their preference, is to do the online worship. Yeah. And that's something that I found also was interesting about his choice of words there. Like, when he says the majority of people at online worship, I would not have phrased that away originally. And I think that's something that I want to try to change my vocabulary for, because I would have said, the people who are watching worship online. Yeah. It's an important perspective for us to have.
I agree.
It's not they're watching worship. They are at worship online. And he talks too about the idea of curating the digital space, that it's not just, being a hybrid church isn't just streaming your worship service online. You have to think about, what is the virtual space that people are engaging with there like? I don't even know how to begin to think about that, right? Yeah. What is the interface they're logging in with? What is the web page like? How do they come into that? Is there a chat room? All these different pieces that are the worship space, the sanctuary. They are the online sanctuary. What does that mean? Yeah. And I think that's an exciting and intimidating thing to think about at this stage, because we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of that yet.
I agree. And again, with you and I leading in this physical space, it might be interesting to explore what it means to not be in this physical space, just to understand that we are at worship with a community, even though, like you said, we're not literally in the same room. We're in the great living room of the sky, as Rob Bell kind of talks about that, which I just kind of love. Is where all the saints gather, that kind of imagery, which again is teaching this old dog a new trick, a new vocabulary, how to speak about this, which is a challenging piece even for me.
I think for sure. I mean, I think that a lot of this is going to involve not just that vocabulary, but what that vocabulary represents, right? And that we are intentional about recognizing this isn't just another mode or another way of doing things. It's about changing, again, as they say in the first chapter, everything we are about ministry and how that works.
Yeah.
You had a really great comment about Calvary Alive that I wanted to touch back on too.
So when I arrived in 2001, the Wednesday night gathering was called Calvary Alive, ! And it was just started by one of the previous pastors here, just trying to have Wednesday night be a gathering place. And it was still kind of getting its wings. And one of our themes one year was that Wednesday night counts. And some of you might remember this. And we said it in worship. We talked about it in the newsletters because there was this sense of, is Wednesday Sabbath?
Yeah. Is it real?
Is it real? Does it count?
Yeah.
Is it in addition to Sunday? Are we expected to come twice a week? Or can it be your worship service? And so the council, together with the senior pastor at the time, put this slogan together about Wednesdays count. And it took a while. And I think, again, probably right prior to COVID, Wednesday night was our largest worship.
Yeah.
It has grown into something where we have hundreds of people here in our space for a variety of different faith formations, meal, choir, worship, the whole thing. And I think hearing that, does Wednesday count now, we'd almost laugh.
Right.
It's developed into the DNA of who we are. And again, not just our churches, many churches went to a midweek worship service, which in the old tradition happened on Lent and Advent.
And that was it.
And they would have one offering. So that is expanded. Yeah. So I think, again, will in another 20 years, we look back and think,
is hybrid church real? Of course it is. What a silly question.
Does online worship count? And of course, that's the majority of people. I mean, it seems unimaginable to me right now, but in a microcosm, I think that 2001 question is Wednesday worship count may be what we are talking about in 20 more years.
I think you're probably right about that. And it does really open up a lot of different options isn't the word I'm looking for, but different ways of doing worship too. I mean, we were talking before about how in some ways it kind of lets us get back to some of the roots of the early church.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
That back in the very beginning, people were meeting in their homes and they were getting together with maybe their family and one other and just worshiping in a small group in their dining room or whatever it might be. And now with online worship, that's kind of an option again.
Why not?
Yeah.
I mean, again, I think just think about the going away for a hockey tournament. You're getting back Sunday at 2 o'clock and Sunday at 4 o'clock. You turn that into a worship with those families. We all missed Sunday morning worship. We go to the recording, we worship and break bread together, for the sacramental worship as well as maybe part of our gathering. And that's the Acts 2:42. Like you said, we're just going right back to the basics. And we played with this as watch parties. And again, with COVID, being COVID safe, this is how we tried to get around early about people not being alone.
Right, for communion.
For communion is to watch it together in community. But watch party was probably our own vocabulary. It's Acts 2:42, home church. Home church is really what the early church did. And again, knowing that that is a great way of lay leadership, priesthood of all believers, talking about that, to say we will find a time to set aside Sabbath worship.
Yeah.
And it might just not be you coming to a space at a specific time for it to count.
Right.
But rather, it counts wherever you are.
Exactly.
And 2 or 3 more are gathered.
I mean, how can it can't be more real than that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's it's biblical. That is what worship is. It's coming together wherever you might be with 2 or 3 more are gathered and Christ shows up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's good stuff. That's good stuff.
So it's interesting that we, kind of come around so full circle. I mean, even with the full circle of Jesus ascending and these initial disciples thinking like, what the heck just happened?
What do we do?
Can't we just go back?
Yeah.
Jesus, can't you just come back and shepherd us? They found a way forward. And again, I think that's what we're trying to do. We're without a roadmap. We're without someone saying, this is what you do next. Jesus is saying, you guys can figure this out. Just like the first disciples did. You will find your way. Follow me.
Yeah.
Follow me. And we will make disciples of all nations. And again, the technical and adaptive ways that we do that are still kind of in the making. But really, I encourage you to email in podcast@calvarybemidji.org. Share your questions, your thoughts.
And even if you haven't gotten the book yet, like we've been saying, I mean, we had a comment written in on Facebook from Cheryl. She said that she watched the very first podcast we did of this book, and then she went out and got the book and read the first chapter, loving it and wanting to engage on that more. She has some thoughts about, that hybrid definitely opens up the viewing audience of who can be reached. And we want more comments. We want more conversation with you too. You can join us on Wednesday nights, 7:15. We're going to be doing our Zoom conversations about each chapter of this book that same week. And so you can log on to the website, get the Zoom code, and join us for that. And like Pastor Genelle said, email us, find us, call us, whatever you want to do. We want to have this conversation with you. It is a great time for us to kind of explore this together. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is one thing that we are in uncharted territory in a lot of ways, but that's exciting because we can do this together as a congregation, as a community, as a family.
Yes, indeed. So we look forward to hearing from you. We'll be back next week. Mm-hmm. Another edition of Calvary Connections looking at the next chapter too. So we invite you any way you can to join us in this great conversation.
Absolutely.
Until next week, have a great one.
We love you very much.